Kia ora tātou. Good morning and a very warm welcome to everybody to our council meeting of Wednesday the 28th of June 2023. And to those in the gallery and online, just want to explain a bit of housekeeping. So the meeting's being recorded, is being live streamed on the council's YouTube channel. In terms of health and safety, in the unlikely event of an emergency, please follow your way through the green signs, and the evacuation area is next to the clock tower in the square to Maraeohine. Building is a non-smoking facility. If you wish to do that, please go over to Fielding or Ashurst or somewhere a bit further. But seriously, in the unlikely event of any issues, a defibrillator is located at the front of house on the ground floor. Any incidences, please report them to our committee administration. For officers, could you please, just first time speaking, if you could just perhaps give your name and title, just for those online. And we have, I think, Councillor Harpiter is online. And we'll now go to our order of business today, and I'll ask the Deputy Mayor this morning to open us with a karakia, please.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Mayor, o tira tēnā tātou. Tū tawa mai I runga, tū tawa mai I raro, tū tawa mai I roto, tū tawa mai I waho. Kia tau ai te Māori tū, te Māori ora, ki te katoa, haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. Come forth from above, below, within, and from the environment, vitality and well-being for all, strengthened in unity. Kia ora.
Thank you. Right, we'll just go to apologies and receive the apologies from Councillor Lorna Johnson, and that we have Councillors Rachel Bowen and Councillors Karen Naylor for early departure. I'm happy to move those. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. No commentary. We will vote, please. Can we just check the technology? And it's passed, 14 votes for and none against. Thank you. Right, we'll move through to notification of any late items, and I haven't been notified. There's nothing from the floor. Move through to declarations of interest. I will just comment that I have an interest in item 17. Deputy Mayor.
Kia ora, Mr. Mayor. I have a conflict of interest in the Globe Theatre.
Okay, thank you. Can they be noted? Yeah. All right, they are noted. Okay, nothing else? Great. We'll move through to public comment. And there is a number here this morning, so again, welcome to those in the gallery. Our first one was Mr. Holmes, Mr. Brian Holmes, from Ebony Coffee and Coffee in a Box, but I understand he's unwell, so he is not coming. So we'll move through to Chris Teo-Sherrill. Chris, welcome. And Chris, it's you're well used to this chamber. It's 3 minutes, and with the number here today, we'll probably be very strict on that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Grant. Look, at last, Featherston Street is going to be changed to help bring balance to our transport system, allowing people to choose how they move along it by making it safer for people to walk, ride, or to drive their cars along. And I just want to raise 2 points today. Firstly, having more pedestrian crossings is really good, but there also need to be crossings of the side streets. That needs to be addressed. At the moment, a lot of them are very wide and difficult to get across, and they need to be narrowed, much as Karamu Street has already been done. It makes it easier for pedestrians, and it makes it so that cars actually slow down when they go in and out of those streets, which is good for everybody. Secondly, I ask you to support the one-way protected cycleway on each side of the street, and this is because NZTA makes no bones about it. Two-way facilities to support the one-way protected two-way facilities are especially hazardous at side roads and driveways, as motorists often don't expect cyclists to be approaching from the wrong direction. And this project is more than anything, it's about safety, or meant to be about safety, and making that street feel safe and be safe for people to ride and walk along it. International guidance is very clear. It's very wary of two-way cycle facilities, except where there are few side roads or driveways, or when cycle movements are highly tidal. But neither is the case for Featherston Street. There are 20 side streets and private roads on the north side and 23 on the south side. And there are 173 driveways on the north side and 159 on the south side. So pretty much the same on both sides. And because there are destinations all the way along that street, schools, hospitals, churches, shops, you name it, people are going in both directions all times of day. So the flow of pedestrians and riders is not tidal now, and it's never really likely to be. There are some two-way cycleways in other cities in New Zealand, but in general they're along stretches of street with few driveways, such as Beach Road, Nelson Street and Quay Street in downtown Auckland, or through parks and along quiet residential streets, as the Grove Road cycleway in Christchurch exemplifies. St Vincent Street in Nelson might be more similar to Featherston Street. However, in 2014, a safety audit of that facility said extraordinary measures are required to mitigate the inherent risks involved at intersections and driveways for two-way separated facilities on one side of the road. And when talking about motor vehicles exiting driveways, the audit said crashes are likely to be common. Yesterday, I wanted to find out more about it, so I phoned up NCC and I talked to a traffic engineer there, and he said they're actually intending to make quite a few changes over the coming years to it, because people say they feel uncomfortable using it, and locals actually call it, they say it's the problem child of the Nelson cycling network. He also said there are about 4,000 vehicles per day using St Vincent. That compares to about 12 to 14,000 using Featherston Street. So from the number of side streets and driveways, as well as the number of motor vehicles using it, I think that it's clear that Featherston Street is not well suited to having a two-way cycleway along it. And perhaps one of the most interesting things he said was that they've actually put in a number of other protected cycleways, one-way cycleways, and on streets where there are schools, he said that they have seen a massive increase in the number of kids cycling to school, especially to primary and intermediate schools.
Thank you, Chris. We're well over, so appreciate your commentary.
Thank you.
And I think you've got your point across. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Right, our next one is Nigel Fitzpatrick from Sport Manawatu. Nigel, welcome. Again, you're used to the chamber. Just use your microphone there.
Oh, sorry. Basically, I'm saying pretty much a lot of what Chris said, slightly different. I'm not a traffic engineer. There are bi-directional lanes in other cities. NZTA Waka Kotahi does say that they're more dangerous, and again, it's because of the contraflow. So there's no argument there. There are a large number of commercial driveways, residential driveways, and side streets on Featherston Street. There's lots of pedestrians, and it's the most dangerous street, judging from past injury and deaths in Palmerston North. So it is a dangerous street and it is heavily used. So design is going to be difficult. One of the things that people recommend is the Scott, separated cycleway options tool, and I spoke to a traffic engineer for another consultancy who said that's what he would have used in that situation. Again, Waka Kotahi say to use that. So basically, you've got to list all the commercial driveways, all the residential ones, all the intersections. You look at how many cars use it. It automatically sorts out a risk factor, and it gives you, you can do it for a separated one-way and contraflow, and then it gives you a figure at the end. And I think that should have been done today. I think that without that report, you don't know you know that the bidirectional is more dangerous, but you don't know how much more dangerous it is. And the multi-criteria analysis they used in the appendix, way back in Appendix A, I think it is. Again, it's unclear how they got to the figures they got to. The single one is like double 1.6 from memory, 0.65 for the other one. But how did they get to those figures? As councillors, I feel that you are flying a little bit blind. I also think that this is probably one of the more important decisions you'll make this year. The cycle network is broken. It's disconnected, and I do note the comments from councillors that you've built cycle lanes and hardly anyone uses them. And that's because you've built a kilometre or so, and thank you for doing that. That is appreciated. But it then stops when you get to the central city, or if you build Featherston Street, you've got to think about further on how bicyclists get on and off that road. So it is building that whole network. And if you build a bad network, if you build Featherston Street so that it doesn't attract cyclists, the experienced cyclists will end up riding on the road because they don't like getting onto the separated cycleway where there's lots of things they can bump into. The inexperienced cyclists will stay in their car. So I think you have got a very difficult decision, but I would recommend that you look at the Waka Kotahi recommended analysis, which is the separated cycleway options tool. Get that report back, and that will help, I think, identify how safe or unsafe the cycleway is, the bidirectional or the single way, and it gives you an idea whether it's actually fit for purpose. Because if you build something and you spend millions of dollars, no one's going to go back in a couple of years and rebuild it because it's such a headache. Get it right first time, and I think get a bit more information. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Nigel. Well timed. Thank you for your commentary. Right, we'll move through to number 10. I invite Bevan. Bevan.
Just me.
Bevan from Mitre 10. And you're speaking on behalf of a number of businesses there.
Yes, yep. So I'm Bevan Bradburn, General Manager of Mitre 10 on Featherston Street, and I'm not only submitting today on behalf of Mitre 10 but also McDonald's and Countdown, just because our concerns for the cycleway on Featherston Street are closely aligned. We were fully involved in the consultation and co-design process, and we understand and support the safer cycleway in Featherston Street and safety improvements in general that are needed in that area. So why are we here? We're concerned about the loss of right-hand turn access to our businesses. Despite giving feedback at the co-design sessions, we felt that we were not heard. At the final co-design session, both options 1 and 2 that you'll see today and the pictures we took up on the screen, they showed for all of our businesses that a right-hand turn into our business would be excluded by a solid median, and that was somewhat of a broadside for us. A significant portion of our customers come from the right-hand turn direction. Our businesses are heavily reliant on customer vehicle access to our car parks, and nearly 50% of our customers come from the right-hand turn or Featherston Street. We estimate that 25%, we could lose 25% of our sales through a loss of a right-hand turn, because human nature is if you make it difficult to get into, to access a business, they'll find the next easiest one to go to. So it's a real concern for us. And ultimately, if it's tens of thousands of dollars a day across our businesses if we don't have the right-hand turn. So ultimately that can result in job losses and families affected, which none of us want. So we cannot sustain a removal of right turn access. So where to from here? We want Featherston Street to be safer for pedestrians, cyclists and motorists. We want economic activity in the area to be preserved. We believe a solution can be found that preserves the right-hand access and achieves the safety goals that we want to achieve. We'd like to work with council designers to come up with a workable solution for all, and we'd appreciate your support to make that happen. We do believe we can come up with a workable solution that make things safer for everyone. Thank you.
You've still got 50 seconds, but that's fine. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Bevan, and acknowledge your commentary as well. Just get the tech to catch up. All right, so we've got our public comment there, and that it be received for information. I'm happy to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor, and I'll look to vote, please. And it's passed 15 votes for and none against. Thank you. All right, we'll now move through to a petition that we have received, and the petition writer is not here and has asked that it be read out. And it is around the council receiving the petition to stop PNCC from removing car parks for information. And the summary is that it was received from Whitehead Chiropractic Clinic, and the petition is as follows: that PNCC is going to make both sides of Featherston Street from Technical Road to Vogel Street cycle lanes as of July 2024. This will mean there will be no car parking available for their patients. If you wish to stop this process, please sign the below petition. And the petition was signed by 149 people. So we'll accept the petition. I'm quite happy to move that we accept this information, seconded by the Deputy Mayor, and I'll ask you to vote, please. It's passed 15 votes for, none against. Thank you. All right, we've just got a couple of other housekeeping items to get through before we discuss the Featherston Street cycleway update. And this is around the recent King's Birthday Honours List of 2023, and it's around Council resolving that we can congratulations will be conveyed on behalf of the councils to the local recipients of the King's Birthday Honours 2023. And councillors, they're on pages 9 through to 15. I'm going to ad-lib a little bit because there's a lot of text here, and I'll start with the first, which is Distinguished Professor Nigel Peter French, and his honour was a Companion of the New Zealand Order of Merit for services to epidemiology. And Professor Nigel French began his career as a epidemiologist in the United Kingdom before moving to New Zealand, where he was appointed Professor of Food Science and Veterinarian Public Health at Massey University in 2004. He was the founder and the inaugural director of the New Zealand Food Safety Science and Research Centre, and he founded and led the New Zealand-China Food Protection Network. He's provided a lot of technical advice to the New Zealand Government towards New Zealand's COVID-19 response, and he has been involved in many international research initiatives. Our second local is Professor Ralph Ernest Harper Sims, and he is a Companion of the New Zealand Order of Merit for services to sustainable energy research. Professor Ralph Sims is currently Professor Emeritus of Sustainable Energy and Climate Mitigation at Massey University. He's one of New Zealand's expert writers and has contributed to many papers, both nationally and internationally, including the new and emerging renewable energy opportunities in New Zealand. He led the writing of chapters and in the Intergovernment panel on climate change, including that on energy supply, which was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007, and continues to work in this sector right through to today. Mrs. Mataroa Vicky Lee Maa, and she's an officer of the New Zealand Order of Merit for services to Māori and Pacific Health. Mrs. Mataroa Maa of Ngāti Whātua, Ngāti Parora, and Ngāti Puhu has had a career in health as registered nurse and family therapist for over more than 40 years, working in mental health and addiction services. She's the CEO of Te Tihi o Ruahine Whānau Ora, and has supported the development of the Te Tihi Alliance, covering the Palmerston North Tararua, Manawatu and Horowhenua districts. She's worked across many sectors, including health, welfare, police, education, local government, and along with the New Zealand Government Department, Te Puni Kukuri, in developing responsive models for whānau and families. So I'd like to, on behalf of Council, congratulate our local recipients. I'm happy to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I will open it up for any commentary if anybody wants to make a comment. There being none, we will vote, please. And that has passed 15 votes for, none against. All right, we'll move through to confirmation of our minutes, resolving that the minutes of the Council meeting of the 14th of June 2023, Part 1, public, as amended, and the amendment is the Appendix 1, around the resolution to set rates, clauses 93 to 23, is attached as it was omitted to the agenda. And so that be confirmed as a true and correct record. I'm happy to move those. Second by the Deputy Mayor. Any matters arising? And there being none, we will vote. And that has passed 15 votes for and none against. Thank you. All right, we're going to take item 10 first before item 9. So this is around Featherston Street Cycleway update, and I'll invite officers up, Hamish Featonby, James McGill from our infrastructure team, and I think, is Olivia coming as well? Yeah, Olivia Wicks from Comms.
Thank you, Mr Mayor and elected members. We're here today to present to you the two cycleway options that came out of the co-design process for Featherston Street. A decision between the two options is required for the detailed design to be completed in time for the project to succeed within the time frame we have for the funding. I have Liv and James with me who will elaborate on the process we've been through to date and how it ties to our broader strategies with some slides. But first I'd like to acknowledge our visiting colleagues who are here in support of the project, who we may call on to answer some detailed questions if required. We've got Jeff Haynes, Gina Weston and Greg Bassam online from Waka Kotahi, and in person we have Glenn Connolly as well. And from WSP we have Drew Grover online and Braden Prideaux here in person, who are our technical leads on this project. I'll hand over to Liv to take us through the details. Well, James first.
Good morning, everyone. So to start off this presentation, we thought we'd want to talk to, where Featherston Street sits in terms of the wider context, because it's important to note that this isn't just a cycleway, it's part of a network and part of wider strategic planning. And so on the slide you can see we've got quite a few policies, and I'll briefly talk to these, but the first one that I want to highlight is the government policy statement on land transport. So this is the national direction for how we approach land transport, and there's 4 strategic priorities outlined by this document, 2 of which are really key to the Featherston Street Cycleway or any cycleway, and that is safety and climate change. In regards to safety, this is about reducing deaths and serious injuries for our transport network, something that aligns closely with the city's aspirations. So I'll note that in our transport plan, we have a goal of having 0 deaths and serious injuries on our roads. And it's deaths and serious injuries and safety is something that's often seen as a barrier to the uptake of active modes, and that a high quality infrastructure improvements can actually help to facilitate greater active mode use, something which is also reflected in our asset management plan. In terms of climate change, the focus of this is about reducing CO2 emissions, something that we have at the regional level through the Regional Land Transport Plan, with a 15% reduction of land transport emissions, as well as our own Goal 4, so a 30% reduction in CO2 emissions. Alongside this, it's important to note that supporting emissions reduction is the Emissions Reduction Plan, which is a catalyst direction and helped unlock funding through the Transport Choices program that has helped us to advance this project. And so I'll just talk to the last couple items that I haven't mentioned, which is first the Palmerston North Integrated Transport Initiative, which is a series of programs seeking to improve economic growth, support freight distribution, but also address safety issues and improve the livability of residential areas and the city centre. So from this program works, we have essentially the Strategic Networks document, which was approved endorsed last week, as well as the Urban Cycle Master Plan. And so figure 1 you can see is our Urban Cycle Master Plan, and as you can see, Featherston Street is part of a network. It does connect to other cycleways, and it enables people to move around once it's all completed via active modes in a safe manner. The last thing I'll mention is just that Featherston Street has also been identified as an area of intensification or medium density. And so as we develop this area, we want to think about how these people are moving into and through this area, because as we have increased houses in that area, we will have increased people wanting to move in the area. So having cycleways will unlock the potential for greater active modes for these people. So I'll hand over to Liv.
Good morning. I'm going to take you through some slides of some information that's in the appendix that we just wanted to clarify some things or talk to you a little bit more about. And one of the most common questions that we've been asked is just how dangerous is Featherston Street? And so crashes are one of the ways that we can explain that. Before I get and explain some of these numbers, one thing that's really important to note is that these are only crashes where emergency services attend. So they're not the near misses where you pull over and exchange insurance details or where you have near misses. So only those ones that emergency services go to. So 434 crashes in the past 10 years, 2 of those were fatal. There were 28 cycle crashes and 19 crashes involving pedestrians. And pedestrians and cyclists make up about 1/3 of death and serious injury crashes, despite only being involved in 11% of those crashes. Featherston Street and the Rangitikei Street intersection is identified as one of our most dangerous intersections in the city due to the number of crashes. And the reason crashes are occurring for cyclists are parked cars opening, so especially because we've got a lot of parallel parks on Featherston Street, vehicles turning in and out of driveways and side roads, and vehicles pulling into cycle lanes, because you'll know at the moment on Featherston Street the cycle lane kind of stops and starts and becomes parking or different things at different parts along the street. We've done really significant engagement on this project. Starting back in September 2022, we started talking to businesses and stakeholders along Featherston Street, and then we went out and asked the public about how they would improve safety on Featherston Street and what their perception of safety is. The key themes that came through both from stakeholders and the public, parking, which is probably no surprise. I guess it's really important to think of Featherston Street. It's quite different to other streets where we've done cycleways before, where we've got lots of different users. We've got the small businesses. We have a range of medical centres. We've got Cody, obviously, down the Vogel Street end. We have a number of specialist medical centres and chiropractors, and a lot of them talked about the age of their patients and people who have just had surgery and things like that, so that's why parking's important to them. Central Normal, that parking is their most top priority. in terms of this, we've got a number of sports fields and sports clubs, and they also talked about how the types of sports that occur up and down the street require quite decent amounts of equipment. So people are having to carry a lot, but also that the age of people, you know, we've got the Tākaro Sports facility down the Botanical Road end, so a lot of older people carrying like heavy bowls and things like that. So factoring in those types of things. In the area between Central Normal and Boys High, and again down Vogel Street, the street parking is quite commonly used for people who work in the vicinity, so teachers, high school students, and other people supporting businesses in that area. Pedestrian safety was the overwhelming big public feedback, and also one of the key things that came through from stakeholders as well. People really keen to see more opportunities to cross the road at different locations, and a lot of people identifying where that should happen. People talked about congestion at intersections, particularly the Rangitikei one. Right-hand turns, which we'll talk about a little bit in a second, was one of the key themes around the businesses between Taonui and Ngata Streets. People were really keen to make sure that whatever we did on Featherston Street, this is going to be the first major protected cycleway in the city, that what we do here then becomes the norm for what we do on those other streets. So when we get into Albert, Ruahine, Botanical, that's becomes the network. So that makes it easy for people on bikes to get to know how to move around, but also that motorists and other road users also know what to do. And people were quite mixed when it came to median strips, on whether some loved them because they could turn right, and others commented on how people use median strips to speed up to get to traffic lights and right-hand turns movements quite a bit. When we asked for public feedback, we asked people about their perception of safety, and these graphs here show that. So on the left you've got how safe do people feel riding a bike on Featherston Street. Just if you're looking, if you can't see the numbers, the right-hand column on both graphs is the don't know or no opinion. It's not the 10 score, that's the next one over. So you can see there that people feel very unsafe currently biking on Featherston Street, and that was echoed through the qualitative comments that we received as well. And when we did that early stakeholder feedback with people on Featherston Street, while we obviously knew that pedestrians were a key user of our footpaths in that area, e-scooters, mobility scooters and skateboards, because of the number of schools, was also really high users. So that was one of the other areas where we asked for perception of safety. And again, you can see that that weights towards the area of people feeling unsafe. We did co-design, which is quite different for what we've done in a transport project before. And so I just wanted to briefly explain what that actually looked like. So we held 3 sessions. Each session was 3 hours, so 9 hours of co-design time altogether. In terms of who was invited, all of the businesses and stakeholders on the street and the direct surrounds, our key stakeholder groups, partners, our sector leads groups, everyone who gave feedback via our website was invited along. One of the really neat things, if some of you were there, that you would have seen that we had kids there, we had older people, we had people with disabilities, and we had a really, really wide range of people who had different interests. So we didn't have a group of just cyclists or a group of just businesses. We had a really good mix of people in that room. In terms of co-design, though, we just wanted to clarify that there wasn't a big representation of the smaller businesses there. That's because a lot of them the businesses are open at night time, so they weren't able to come. And some of the schools weren't able to come along either. They were in the process of the negotiations with government, which meant that they wouldn't work in the evening time. But we have made sure that through our one-on-one engagement that we've got really good understanding of what their thoughts are. We had about 50 to 100 people come to each of those sessions, and most attended 2 or 3 sessions. So while everyone would have come to co-design with their own hat on, one of the things about co-design was getting them to think about how other people as well. So one of the first activities we did was getting them to think about what was important to other users and what mattered to those users. And then we used that for some other activities when we were looking at options and things like that. It's also important to note, I guess, that if someone was attending as, say, a business person, there's a good chance they probably also were attending with a motorist hat on, or a parent of a school, or someone might have been there thinking with multiple hats on in terms of their users. And on the 3rd session, which was 2 weeks ago, we asked people to give us some feedback about co-design, and 79% of people said that they would participate in co-design again, and the remaining 30% remaining 20% was a small number said no, but the majority of that group said that they would, depending on the project. So people really supportive and quite enjoyed this new process for a transport project. In terms of the options, all of the cycleway options change the way that the road looks at the moment. We've got Glenn here and he is able to answer some questions soon, but Waka Kotahi is planning to upgrade the Rangitikei Featherston Street intersection at the same time as we do this. So that will be either a raised platform or platforms, which will help reduce speeds. So that reallocation of road space will also see a change in the traffic lights. So currently we've got a left, a straight and a right, and that will become, based on the modelling at this point, a left and a straight and a right at those intersections. We'll also have to look, depending on the option, at what other intersections will need some changes. So Russell Street is probably one of those ones as well. All options will see that the central median has been removed, which will allow for on-street car parking, but what WSP has done has put right-hand bays in where the busiest side streets are. And just in terms of lane width, it's important to think, I guess at the moment, because of the way that the road goes, you know, when someone's in front of you, you can move around them and you can use the median, and if people aren't parked there to get around them, that new road spacing will mean that people will have to adapt to some new changes, with buses potentially stopping in lane at some locations on the street, and rubbish services as well, which I can explain shortly. We did do parking surveys, and what a parking survey means is that we have a car with a camera and a person drives around a route for us. And so we did a weekday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m, and a weekend, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. What you can see there is what we call peak occupancy. So at the busiest point of the day is shown on these maps, the busiest obviously being the red. So if you look at the map on the left, the red area is the area around the intersection, so where our big retailers are. On the other side here, that's the area around the hospital, Papaioia Park, Russell Street. Green and blue are like less people parking there, red and orange are the higher numbers. One of the things that was quite, I guess, important to note is that while you can see that there's quite high demand for people on Featherston Street with the red bits, you can see that there's a lot of side street ability there as well. One thing that we did explain at co-design too is that the majority of people in the parking surveys were parking on the southern side of the road, so that's the side of Countdown and Mitre 10, and that's primarily, we expect, because most of the small businesses are on that side of the street. And that was one of the reasons why one of the options is the bi-directional on the northern side of the road rather than the southern side. In terms of parking, we just wanted to explain this graph in your appendix again. So that peak occupancy again is at the busiest time of the day, how many people were parked there. And these numbers, it's quite important to note, they aren't white paint marks on the road. What WSP has done has looked at the stretch of the street and divided it up into how many car parks are potentially in that space based on how long the road is. So to give you an example, say Botanical to Rangitikei, currently there could be space for 192 car parks. At its busiest, 58 of those car parks were used. On a one-way option, that would be 26, and on the two-way option, there would be 50 retained. The one that I would just draw your attention to is at Oahine to Vogel. You go from 150 potential spaces to 0 with a one-way or 41 with a two-way. And I guess why I just wanted to draw your attention to that one is that's the area that we're not going to be doing construction in as part of this project. And the stakeholders, I guess, they have been involved, but they have been less significantly involved than what our other ones who are getting construction in the next 9 months are. But in terms of parking, some things, in terms of next step is detailed design will help us work with the stakeholders on the street to figure out how we can find more parking potential. So that means that we can look at potentially the locations of where pedestrian crossings might be and see if that could provide some space. There's some ability in some instances where parking is on the concept designs on one side of the road that could switch to the other side of the road. And we can also look at things like time restrictions as a way to help turn over car parking. I guess it's not just about cycleways. I mentioned that pedestrian safety is one of the key things that came through from that public feedback. what we did in the first co-design session was we asked people where they would put more pedestrian crossings, and so that's the top there. And then the bottom picture there is where WSP has suggested some potential crossings. One thing we are keen on, and every school is very focused on their pedestrian safety, that was their biggest priority, right, is at Central Normal and Boys High to have raised crossings, so that's where we have the gradient up. And then potentially we could do that with other ones as well. Just to give you some context, what you're looking at there, the locations roughly are around the arena area, around Burke Annandale, which is where the pharmacy and botanical laundry are. And then you come up more around Roy Street, then around the hospital, and then the last one down by Vogel Street. But we still need to work through this a lot more. We did provide this at co-design and got some feedback on those locations and got a good lot of feedback, so we'll continue to flesh that out. In terms of raised crossings, WSP did explain to a number of people at co-design that because of Featherston Street and how it's used, you're not going to have a big bump. We realise that emergency services and trucks are going to have to use that street, so we'll be working with the people who, I guess, have those big vehicles to make sure that we get that gradient right so that it's usable, but also that it does help with our safety improvements. Featherston Street is our first real protected cycleway that involves heavily residential areas. So while we have Main Street at the moment, we don't really have many houses there, so we've never had to factor in waste collection before. And so we've talked about that a bit in our appendix, about some potential options, and the option that we're recommending to proceed with, which is, in the briefest way possible, that off-peak, the rubbish trucks would ride half in the cycle lane and half overside, so they'd have a wheel on either side, and that means that people would be able to move around that rubbish truck, because otherwise what will happen is all the cars will have to wait behind the truck, and of course if medium density becomes more of a thing, you could be waiting for some time. That's pretty much what happens at the moment now. So where we don't have protected cycle lanes, the waste services are using that space already. And it's what's used in other locations as well. So Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch do that as well. And there is opportunities for us to use the flexi-style posts at, when you're coming out of an intersection or in high conflict areas or in areas where there's not a lot of residential use. We can use them a bit more because those people aren't putting out all their bins. That also would allow the emergency services, if they absolutely needed to, an emergency, to potentially use that space as well. And all of them have said to us, both the waste providers and the emergency services, that they don't try to use arterials to do their operational work at peak times. So they are using those streets when it's a bit quieter. But that is one of the things that we will look at trialling. As part of the Streets for People component of the project, we need to do some trials, and so we're looking at maybe doing a setup and getting some of these big users to come along and practice with those separators and how they might work. You've heard from Bevan about his concerns and their concerns about the right-hand turns, and so we just wanted to explain, so the concepts show a potential raised median outside those major retailers between Ngāta and Taonui. That's been added for consideration, and that's because of the significant public and stakeholder concerns. So when we did that public feedback, around half of people raised that as one of their concerns. McDonald's and Countdown more so than Mitre 10, the crash statistics outside those locations and the potential for stacking. And so as I explained before, if you look at the top picture and you pretend someone's turning right into the McDonald's drive-through, at the moment you'd be able to potentially drive around that silver car on the bike lane, but you won't be able to do that on the new road layout, which means that people will be having to wait to turn right. And so the businesses have raised concerns, and not just these businesses, there are other businesses in that vicinity as well. And so what we have committed with them is to look at options, and there is options available that we can look at. So things like right-hand bays or clearways could be options, and the status quo is potentially an option too. But I guess the key thing is this here doesn't have to be something that we consider today. We can continue with the cycleway and pedestrian improvements and come back to you once we've got some more options and once we've worked with the businesses a bit more about what could happen in that space. Tight time frames. Today, there's obviously the decision, our concept design. So concept design is what you've seen out in the corridor. So it's a a pretty rough idea of what it's going to look like. That's due to Waka Kotahi at the end of July. In August, we're going to update you on some plans for what those trials could be. And then the detailed design is due to Waka Kotahi at the end of September. We're keen to obviously make sure that you see that beforehand. And just because obviously a number of cities are doing these projects at the moment, and there is everyone's wanting the same type of material, we are going to have to procure, for example, the separators well in advance. Looking at getting the construction tender happen in early November, and we're keen to get construction underway in January. We do have some contractual timeframes for construction, but we're also keen, because obviously you all know that's the quietest time of the year in terms of our roads, and being able to get some of that work done then would be awesome. Lastly, I just wanted to mention that regardless of the decision that is made, this is going to get a large amount of public feedback, just like these projects that we had here. And whether you're a councillor or just a member of the community, you will have known what that public feedback was like. And these were actually quite relatively small changes in the scheme of things compared to what Featherston Street's going to be like. But one thing I just wanted to explain is we do, I guess, have a big public reaction at the time we make a decision and when construction's happening, and in that first month or 6 weeks when people are getting used to the new road layout. But it dies down pretty quickly as people adapt and get used to the change. So everyone knows planter boxes. Best example I can give you is we had 10,000 queries in the first week that we responded to. Now we probably get 1 or 2 remarks a month about planter boxes. So people do change and adapt really quickly. And that was all I was going to say. So now we're happy to answer all of your questions.
Thanks, Liv. I don't think you need to bring up the planter boxes again, but not a good example. But anyway, look, I've got a number of questions, and probably James might need to come back. So James, you mentioned all the plans that feed into this, and obviously the most important one from a government perspective is the GPS. And we know those are driven by ministers, and as we have a former minister or an absent minister, does the GPS still have as much relevance?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, that is correct. The GPS still stands despite the change of minister.
Okay, so, but it could change again?
Yes, it could change in the future, but that's possibly something that might happen post-election if we have a change of government.
Okay. Crashes, and look, we all, I think we're all on the same wavelength that it is a dangerous bit of road. But you state crashes over 10 years. What are the crashes? What are the crash stats for the last 2 to 3 years? Or why weren't they put up rather than 10 years? Or was it just the stats that are available?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think that was just averaged out across the 10 years. We could go back and get the details per year, if that's helpful. Yeah,
it would be good to know just if it's improved, if it's got worse, if it's the same. So it would be, if you could send that out to all elected members. You spoke heavily about engagement, and I do agree there's been a lot of engagement, but we've heard from 4 businesses today, and just engagement with businesses. So we've got back to everybody? Yep,
so I guess there's been, different types. So with McDonald's and Mitre 10 and stuff, we've met with them a couple of times, we've talked on the phone, they've come to all 3 of the co-design sessions. With the small businesses, we haven't, the ones that weren't able to come to co-design, we went out and asked them for some feedback on those 2 options that we'd showed at co-design. And again, their key thing is just that they want good access to their businesses and retention of as much on-street parking as possible.
So we're getting back to them on everything?
Yes, so we probably send out updates once every week or 2 based on, over the last couple of months it's been quite intensive, and so every time we've done something we've released that to not only our co-design but all of our stakeholders and everyone who made submissions over those 2 engagement periods as well.
All right, I'll leave it at that. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I hope you appreciate I've got a number of questions given the scale of the project. I'd like to ask a question about a metric that's used in the Summerhill section that doesn't seem to be used in the Featherston one. So on page 22, point 2.5, the level of service to pedestrians and cyclists is considered as not high enough to make it safe. I assume that's using some sort of analysis. I'd be interested to know how Featherston scores on that piece of analysis in terms of safety for pedestrians and cyclists.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I'd like to invite Dhruv Grover, who's our WSP technical lead, who's online, if he could perhaps chip in on this one, please.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for that. So this was something that we did as a part of the multi-criteria analysis as well. So we've done the Waka Kotahi separated cycleway tool along with the, so that's very similar to the SCOT analysis that was mentioned by Chris a little bit earlier, but we can look for a specific one based on what was done on Summerhill, and that can actually be replicated to Featherston Street as well. Having said that, yeah, I mean, when we had the co-design workshops with all the members of the public, there was locations of interest when it came to crossing facilities, and there was a submission of about 84 of them, out of which there was about 7 new locations that we identified and worked through, and we seek feedback on where the crossing facilities would be provided and we would need support for.
So to be clear, Summerhill, the level of service is considered as not high enough to be safe, but Featherston Street, we haven't done that similar piece of analysis as to whether the level of service is not high enough to be considered safe.
I don't have the piece of evidence in front of me for Summerhill at the moment, so once I have a look at that, we can actually have a look at and compare what was done and what's been provided for Featherston Street as well.
All right.
And we can get back to providing a little bit more detail on that.
Thank you. Turning now to page 64 around the crash statistics, cyclists and pedestrians have been lumped into one, despite, I presume, to present a worse picture. So looking at the cycle accidents, there's been three serious or fatal over a 10-year period, which only represents 15% of fatal or serious crashes on that road. I just want to have an understanding of whether or not you've done any analysis of those particular 3 incidents and whether or not a separated cycleway such as this would have prevented them.
Dhruv, sorry, pass that question through to Dhruv again, please.
So with regards to the crash statistics with regards to the cyclists and pedestrians, those are the most vulnerable users, and based on that, that's how it is. And then with regards to, we've also done an internal safe systems assessment, and based on that, all safety for all users, including pedestrians, cyclists, and all the motor users was actually taken into account as well. So obviously we do actually get external safe systems auditor to audit on our design, and that process is actually happening as we speak. So when we get commentary on that, we would be able to provide our designers' comments based on that, and that's something that we will definitely take forward when it comes to the detailed design aspect of the project itself.
I appreciate that, but that's not an answer to my question. I'm trying to understand whether 3 accidents over 10 years is a lot or not a lot in the scale of the city. To me, 3 in a 10-year period doesn't seem like an exceptionally dangerous street, but we're being told that it is. So how does that compare to other streets in Palmerston North? Is 3 a lot? I don't know the statistics, you do, so I'm interested to understand the severity of this problem.
Through you, Mr Chair, I think, so Featherston Street, State Highway 3 intersection has been identified as one of the most dangerous intersections in the city, certainly for the vulnerable users. I think while I don't have the stats to hand, and we could supply them after the fact, I'm pretty confident that it's one of the more dangerous areas in the city.
Okay. We'll move on then. So what opportunity did co-design participants and the public in general have to share a preference for the status quo, if any? It appears we've presented them with a fait accompli and told them this is what's happening. Did they have an opportunity to share that they would have preferred we left it as is?
We didn't put status quo up as an option because I guess that's always an option for council to consider at the point of decision making, but I guess we were led, and the governance, our internal governance team discussed this about when you look at all of the strategic direction council has, and by entering the contracts with Waka Kotahi, there's an element of that we would be seriously considering an option, and that option of status quo is still available to you. Some people did put that on the feedback, a couple of people did, but it wasn't, I guess, overwhelming. And some people did raise, you know, do we need to make change? Can't we just leave it as it is? So that did make up a small proportion, but it wouldn't have been an overwhelming proportion in terms of both the stakeholder and co-design and the public feedback. People were all keen to see a safer Featherston Street for all road users.
So people expressed to me the view that they didn't go to the co-design sessions because they felt they'd have no ability to express a preference for the status quo. It would be fair to say that's true. We presented a case that we were going to do this, and it was a matter of which cycleway we were going to do, not a case of whether we would or wouldn't put a cycleway in place.
Yeah, I think that's
Okay.
that's fair. That we put up 3 options for cycleways, knowing that you all have the opportunity to remain status quo.
Page 67 and 68 identifies a number of concerns around parking. Reading through this report, it doesn't seem that any of them have been addressed. I just want to understand what consideration has been given. Consultation's clearly identified the concerns, but it seems we're just being told, oh, well, we're too bad. It is what it is.
So all the feedback that we have about parking will form part of detailed design. So what WSP has done for co-design, and I guess it's important to note, between co-design 2 and co-design 3, we did not make any changes to the maps. What was different between the 2 sessions is in the first session, the maps and where we got feedback was between the central normal Boys High area, and the 3rd session we showed that whole stretch, because obviously whatever we do in terms of the cycleway is going to affect the whole stretch, not just that core component. When I was explaining through those slides, that's where parking is going to become, I guess, a much bigger focus once we know the option, because I guess WSP and Drew might be able to chip in here. It's a bit hard to make all of those tweaks until we have some guidance as to what that option will be. Drew, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, that's right. And then one of the other things as well, as a part of detailed design we'll be looking at is the individual businesses that we've received feedback on, and where we do actually believe parking is an absolutely necessary, we will be actually looking at locations to be able to provide that parking. As you can appreciate, at this point in time, the level of details on the plans or the design is actually at concept level. So when we do go into the next phase, where we do actually receive public feedback, and along with your feedback as well, that's something that we'll take into consideration and provide locations of where appropriate parking can be provided. As an appreciation as well, as a part of the design, we've got to keep into account all users of the road. So that includes the cyclists, the pedestrians, and vehicles. So that's what we've got to design to. So we've got network guidance both for cycling, walking, and for all users with regards to public transport, emergency vehicles, and the heavy vehicles that we've got to keep into account. So we've with a road like Featherston Street, where we do actually have a few competing interests along the whole stretch, the design in some locations can be challenging, and rightly said, we can actually take that as a part of our detailed design and refine those locations where we can actually do that.
Thank you. Page 74, it talks about, it does a cross analysis on 4.8 of the different options, and the unidirectional cycleway scores 1.25. I just want to 1.25 what?
So that's a scoring with regards to our MCA multi-criteria analysis that we've carried out. So as part of the multi-criteria analysis, apart from just so keeping into account the Waka Kotahi separated cycleway tool, we had about 14 other, elements that we kept into account as a part of that. So which included road safety for all users, both cycling and walking. We had the cycling improvements as a whole, The other one was the potential affordability depending on the funding streams, the achievability with regards to deliveries and timeframes, the alignment of public transport, and the other one that we had that were more taking into account the actual road itself. So the environmental effects, the impacts on the Te Reo Māori, the social and cultural impacts, the property impacts, pedestrian impacts, special fit impact, sorry, I'm going a little bit faster, network performance, parking, and the alignments of side roads. And then the last bit was the Safe Systems Assessment Framework for all users. So those were the different criteria that we actually kept into account before we actually put that. So that actually picks out a score based on that. So each one of them had a different weightage of how it is. It's quite a chunky piece of work that we carried out. There was a session that went over 4 hours, which we had people from different parts of PNCC sit and go through, and we all scored it based on that. So we're welcome to actually provide that to you, but yeah, it'll take me quite a while to actually explain each and every one of them for all the 3 options that we carried out at this meeting at the moment.
Thank you for that. No, and I appreciate that. On the page before, it's represented as out of a percentage, out of 100%, and yet the figure we're given isn't a percentage. So I'm just trying to understand what the actual metric, the figure. I appreciate all the factors led into it, but it says 1.25. Is that 1.25 out of 2? 1.25 out of 1. What is it?
Just having a look. So that's based on the score that we provide from, so the score is basically provided from 3 through to -3, with 0 being a status quo. And then each one of them actually provides a percentage of that. There is a formula based on that, and that's what spits out that number.
Appreciate that answer, thank you. My next question is on page 79 around the parking occupancy surveys, and that figure's been bothering me, and it's taken me a while to figure out why. I've looked at the forecasts of all of those days, and they were all clear sky, warm summer's days with no rain. Given the fact that I would assume it would be accepted that when it is colder, raining, and the days are shorter, people are more likely to drive and park. How can we trust the figures of peak occupancy based off arguably the best conditions in summer weather in Palmerston North? How can we trust they're an accurate reflection of actual peak occupancy, not just of summer occupancy?
This is probably more of a WSP question, but I'll say what they explained to me, which is that when you do parking surveys, you try and pick the most generic day possible, right? So you try and pick one where it's not school holidays, there's not a big event on, there's not anything out of the blue. And one component of this project is constant monitoring and evaluation, and so there will be more parking and biking and pedestrian surveys throughout. Oh, sorry. And, you know, I guess we could try and find a day where it looks like it's going to rain to see if that provides any comparison.
So how do we trust figures based off clear, non-rain summer's days as reflective of the actual peak occupancy during any other season of the year, where it is going to be colder and wetter and the days will be shorter? How do we trust 4 days that were chosen in the middle of summer as reflective of that, when surely that would be when we see the lowest peak occupancy of any time during the year?
Drew, do you have any examples of other locations where the weather impacts parking occupancy?
Sorry, I haven't been asked that question before, but as Liv mentioned, there is going to be constant parking evaluations, and when it comes to pedestrians and biking usage along that stretch of road.
Okay. Page 81, it says under 8.5 that infrastructure that is out of the scope from Transport Choices funding includes car parking retained between curb line and cycle lane and removing trees instead of car parking. Just trying to appreciate what that means. So does that mean we haven't looked at all the options available to us due to limitations or funding or restrictions on the funding criteria? So we haven't looked at those 2 options.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So I think this is in reference to the fact that the Transport Choices is for projects or elements of the project that affect the cycleway only. We will certainly be looking at the car parking and other infrastructure as part of the detailed design, which we need to do between now and September, but that won't be included in that funding package. It would be covered through other means.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of questions. You mentioned Russell Street, and my ears jumped up. What did you intend to do with Russell Street? Because I was one of the councillors that fought to get that roundabout put in to stop the traffic jams that we had there. What is your intention in Russell Street?
Dhruv, can you talk through the plans?
Sure. So that's, you're looking at Russell Street. I'm just bringing the plans up on my. So what was the specific question that you would like to know about Russell Street?
What do you intend to change in Russell Street as it is presently?
So with regards to Russell Streets, to provide for a cycleway, the approaches on the roundabouts will be shared. With regards to a crossing facility, either on the northern side or the southern side of the Russell Street intersection, they will be based on the cycling option that's provided. So cycling option that would be recommended or chosen as part of today's conversation. There'll be a combined zebra crossing with a pedestrian and cycling crossing facility on either the northern side or the southern side with regards to the option that would be chosen.
And the roundabout stays?
The roundabout would stay, yes.
Thank you. The other question is, you mentioned that if we went ahead today and approved this, that later on we could look at the Mitre 10, McDonald's and countdown right turns. If we approve it today, how do you intend to put that in? Is it going to be centre parking or is it going to be centre turn right? So what sort of things are you looking at doing? Because I think the businesses need to have some sort of direction. So could you tell us what you intend to do?
Sorry, would you like me to answer that, Olivia and Hamish?
Yes, please, Dhruv.
So with regards to providing exactly for the entrances in front of Mitre 10 and countdown, the key thing that would be kept into account as well is the competing interest that I mentioned a little bit earlier. It could be a potential loss of 1 or 2 car park spaces, and again, that's something that we'll flesh out as we go along to be able to provide for at least a stacking or a medium strip or a right turn pocket to be able to allow for that. Now, with regards to in front of Mitre 10, that is a little bit, from a design perspective, a little bit easier because it's still a little bit further away from the intersection. But as you can appreciate, being closer to the intersection with the McDonald's entrance, that's something that we would actually be working through, and we'd be able to find solutions from what has been done in different parts of the country as well to be able to see what can be provided. So that's something that we're still looking at the moment. So we've definitely taken the feedback from the bigger businesses there to be able to understand and see how we can accommodate that.
Okay, so at what stage will we as council hear back about where and what will be done as far as those right turns done?
So as we're going along in detailed design, so when it'll be presented to council next, you would be hear back. I think Olivia might be able to give a little bit more as we go along as a part of the detailed design. We can actually provide that information back to the council.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So it will be in sort of August, September once we've worked through that with the businesses themselves.
Yeah, thank you.
Just further to that, there's a number of small businesses, and you, Olivia, mentioned it yourself, and you know the takeaways. There's a small car yard, there's a flower shop, and they rely on that 1 or 2 car parks that are there. What is the thinking there? Is it some bespoke sort of indent to give them something?
Yes, that is correct. So I mean, we've done a bit of a, so as we did these designs, we have actually done a bit of a walkthrough along the whole stretch of Featherston Street that is intended to be constructed as a part of the project, and we've looked at some of those locations, or even potential locations where we could move certain elements to be able to accommodate parking for those businesses, be it one or two or something that'll be in the very immediate vicinity where we can, obviously keeping into account side roads, keeping into account where driveways, vehicle crossings are. So yes, that's something that we'll be refining as a part of this phase of the project itself.
Okay, that's great, thank you. Councillor Isabella.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Ngā mihi kia koutou, mō tō koutou kōrero, me te pānui. Councillor Finlay asked my first question, so I think I wanted to ask a bit about that median barrier on the approach to the intersections at Rangatiki Street and whether that's something that would be trialled as part of the trial period.
Through you, Mr Mayor, yes, we're still sort of confirming the list of trial options. There was certainly one on the long list that we're going to create into a short list soon.
Well, thank you. And just wanted to follow up on Councillor Wood's questioning about crashes and essentially distilling that down to 3 sort of crashes at that intersection. You made the point in your talk that that's exclusively crashes that have been attended by emergency services, that's correct? So that those statistics are not including the entire scope of perception of safety or near misses or incidents where the services were not called?
Yeah, that's right. So it's only crashes where they attended.
Thank you, that's very helpful clarification. I also just wanted to ask, and just to clarify, because there was a comment from Sport Manawatu this morning about not knowing how much safer a unidirectional cycleway is based off of, compared to a unidirectional. I understood from your report that you'd said that that was about 3 times safer. A unidirectional is 3 times safer than a bidirectional. Wondered if you could delve into that a little for me?
Through you, Mr Mayor, so that, yes, the stats that we've had from Wakatahi, that design is about 3 times safer than the bidirectional, and it's for some of the reasons that were mentioned earlier. The number of driveways coming out onto a bidirectional, people generally look one direction and not the other, certainly coming out into the footpaths and that sort of thing, and it's much less intuitive for the cyclists themselves and the pedestrians, and it creates a conflict zone between the 2 different directions. So it's all those things sort of add up together. And yeah.
Right. Awesome, thank you. So that's considered the best practice internationally and nationally, a unidirectional
Correct.
cycleway, but both would be safer than the status quo?
Absolutely, yes.
Great, that's all my questions. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. First question's on exploring when we're future-proofing this road, when you talk about the medium density possibilities around Featherston Street, around the reserve land that we've got, or the grassland for roading, future roading corridor outside Mitre 10 up until the Rangatiki Street intersection. I'm just wanting to understand what the thinking is of widening that carriageway up to the intersection to improve the safety. Has that been considered at all as a roading need?
Drew, have you got any comments on that one?
At this point in time, the way we've designed that is to have the least amount or minimal amount of curb relocation in those areas. So where the design's actually kept is we're wanting to leave the footpath width along the whole corridor to be unchanged. We're looking at the section just between curb to curb on both sides. So at this point in time, to answer that question, not at this stage. But
okay, and then I guess my follow-up question is, why hasn't that been explored when we've got the ownership of that land and it's been a long-term provision for widening that for future-proof?
Through you, Mr Mayor, so that section in front of Mitre 10, in isolation, is looking to be used for placemaking for this project, but there's private properties leading into the intersection that would need to be purchased or utilised in order to make it that whole section work, which is well beyond the scope of this project.
Okay, and then in relation to that, with keeping the width currently as it is and taking out the 3 turning options at the intersection to 2, has there been any studies done on the queuing impact on the vehicles at peak times around how far back it's going to go up the street?
Drew, I believe you've done some work on this.
To add to that, yes, we have actually done some queuing analysis, and we've also done some time analysis based on what it would look like. The short answer to that question is it will be a bit worse off than what the status quo is. With regards to analyzing what the exact status quo is, there's some data that's required for understanding the intersection itself, which is the SCATS data for the intersection. That is something that was not that easily available for that particular intersection, and same thing with Ruahine intersection, Ruahine Featherston intersection as well. So I mean, we've got data, but to answer that question, we don't have data to compare it against what the status quo is. But we do believe we've made some, there was a traffic survey done to be able to understand the approaches that come to the intersections. We've got traffic data essentially for 2 approaches, and based on that, we've made some assumptions what the other 2 approaches on the intersection would look like, and based on that, we've come to that conclusion. So the only way we've actually proposed the change is on Featherston Street, where the left turn and the straight through lane would be combined as compared to what the 2 separate ones are.
Okay, the vagueness of the response still leaves me without kind of understanding the little bit of impact that it might have that was described, and the baseline monitoring of what's happening now. So you can't expand on that any further to help me get some assurance that we're not going to have a problematic situation?
So I think in the current scenario, I'm just going to jot my memory up because I'm trying to bring that report in front of me. The queues are currently up till North Street. If on the eastern approach along Featherston Street, the queues were very similar when we had the traffic analysis done as a part of that as well. And then on the western approach, the queues were along Nata Street, where we would be looking at as well. I think in some cases that has been very similar. These are also keeping into account at peak times, so the peak times being 7 to 9 a.m. in the morning. We've done interpeak between 12 and 2 p.m. and we've done the evening peak between 3 p.m. to 6 p.m.
Okay, thank you. Final question, which come up around talking about some bespoke indented parking around the need of certain businesses being confirmed. And understanding when we did the College Street cycleway, we then had to go back through and do some bus indents and extra car parking, which come out another sizable sum that we had to do to kind of rectify some of the functionality and benefit of the cycle lane. Has it been costed in at any point around the additional work for those indented car park spaces? Because I recall they aren't cheap.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So they're going to be confirmed as part of the detailed design, so we haven't costed them up directly yet. I think there's a provisional sum in our initial estimates.
Will that come out of the Waka Kotahi funding, or will that be an additional request to council to top?
We would have to bring that detail to you once the detailed design's done, so that we know what we're talking to.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Just further to Councillor's question there, and that land that's directly in front of Mitre 10, I mean, Palmerston Boys High students attend and leave school many ways, buses, cycling, walking, but some do get, there is some car use. Has that land been thought of as a separated slipway, similar to what we did at Whakarongo School?
Through Mr. Mayor, Drew, would you Have you heard that option brought up?
I.e. a drop-off, pick-up, drop-off for, you know, a set amount of cars. Because you are taking away everything there and there is no room to put anything back in.
So we could certainly consider it as part of the detailed design, look into the feasibility of it.
I mean, we did it at Whakarongo, which arguably had less of an issue than we're going to have here, so I just thought I'd ask the question. Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and the Chamber. Good morning. I had a number of questions, but they've already been answered, having a console problem. Happy with the questions, not so much with some of the answers. Page 64.1.6. One of my concerns is the pedestrian and cycle count only happened on one day for 5 hours. I'd say, you know, project this magnitude, is that normal?
Drew, could you talk to some of the other projects of this sort of scale that we've done counting, or your team have done counting on?
So, thank you for that. We have predominantly done the counts in front of the two schools, the Central Normal and Palmerston North Boys, and that was done during peak times. We will be looking at doing more surveys to be able to justify that. The other thing as well, as we were walking along the whole of Featherston Street, we did encounter close to half a dozen, or in some locations, and about a dozen cyclists using the road off-peak as well. So we'll be conducting more cycle surveys along with parking surveys to be able to get a lot more robust data to present in front of that.
What about, you know, counting strips? I see those around the city every now and again. Those weren't thought about being put in for a period of time?
Those counting strips predominantly provide information for vehicles. That provides information based on the type of vehicle, the class of vehicle, and the speed that the vehicle's is traveling at. It's not always the true reflection of a cyclist running through it, because it keeps into account how many tires over a certain period actually goes through, more than individually counting a pedestrian or a cyclist.
Thank you. Yeah, I do realise that. I had one actually in the cycle lane outside my house recently, so I just thought of that and wanted to ask that. Thank you.
Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think a number of my questions have been answered, so that leaves me with two questions. On page 75, I'm very much asking in relation to on-street car parks being removed on the section of Ruahine and Vogel Street from 154 to 0. And I think one of my first question is, was this also consulted with the church there? Because I've seen that as part of the engagement process, you engage with Bullseye and Highbury Flea Market. So I wanted to understand whether the church had been consulted on this, because this will be largely affecting them as well.
So you're talking about the church in between?
Life Church and the Medical Centre and everything.
So everyone in that area received a letter, and we've made multiple contacts. Sam's nodding his head, so I think we probably haven't had a chance to talk directly to the church yet, because I guess we've only seen these parking stats in the last 2 weeks ourselves, and that will be part of that engagement period going forward. What I can tell you is we do know that Cody and the church are having conversations about whether their staff can park at the church premises during the week, and whether church people can go and park at Cody on a Sunday. So there are some private conversations happening about parking already, which we're definitely keen to learn more about.
I mean, the reason why I ask is because, going from 154 to 0 car park on that long stretch of road is a bit of a stretch for me personally. But if we considered installing measures such as parking time restriction to promote greater availability of short-term parking for residents also that are affected by this, in terms of when we talk about in order to mitigate this parking shortfall?
Through you, Mr. Chair, so one of the tools in the toolkit is to look at putting parking restrictions in place. Drew and his team will be working through where the parks should be and how they can be operated in a way that encourages turnover, certainly around the businesses. I'm not too sure how that would work in front of residential properties, but that's certainly something Drew could consider as well.
Cool. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll leave my other stuff for comments.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one question left to explore. Interested around the timing of that more active management of side street parking assets and whether that's intended to go live at the same time or whether there's a different timing there.
Through Mr. Mayor, so we're doing a parking and strategy review, I believe, in the next few months, but certainly where there's opportunities down side roads to make changes to parking to improve it. So, for example, Taonui Street could potentially become angled rather than parallel, which would gain some parks in that sort of vicinity. We're sort of looking a bit broader and trying to think a little bit outside the box to maximise the opportunities there as well.
Thanks. So just really interested around timing, whether we're intending to make those improvements concurrent with the change in Featherston Street or not?
Certainly where we can, yes. Yes, we'll try and time it for this financial year if we can.
And do we have adequate budget and planning resource around that? Like, is that wrapped within this project, or is it a separate piece of work?
It's a separate piece of work through our standard budgets.
And do we have sufficient budget and resource to provide that?
Without doing the detailed look at things, I couldn't say conclusively, but we've certainly got enough to get started and have a look at some of those areas.
Can I ask in terms of implications around ongoing maintenance budget, parking warden budgets, those sort of things, or are there adjustments that are going to be needed there, or is that all able to be catered for within existing scope of budget?
The existing budget will go so far. We'll certainly be looking at the LTP. We'll be bringing the discussions back to there with some more detail on the current levels of service versus what this change will mean for that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Online, Councillor Hapeta.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just one question. If we were to say no to changing the right-hand turn into Featherston Street, how severely would this affect this project?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So the effect would potentially be on what we do at that intersection itself. So in either of the two options that we're looking to decide on today is going to utilise some of that space. So by taking some of that space away, we're going to create congestion if we leave the ability to turn right there, unless we do something different with the engineering. And certainly Groove and his team will be, and us, will be working with the businesses to find a way that's going to work for them and work for the space. I mean, unfortunately, everything's a bit of a trade-off within that area in terms of space.
Do you think that we're trading more or less? I mean, when we look, consider just a similar question to what Councillor Dennison asked, is that we took away a right turn from the square to Church Street and then we put it back. Would we have to put these back again because we've done it wrong?
Certainly not the intention to do it wrong, which is why we'll be doing some trials. So this change is one of the things we'll be looking at in the trials that are coming up. Whether we change the lights, the left, take the left turn away, and just have the straight through and the right turn. We'll be hoping to trial that, as well as trial some of the options around the turning off Featherston Street into the businesses, which we can hopefully learn from before having to commit to.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for your response. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, team and officers. My question is about the recommendation 3 regarding the trials. We've heard today from some of the stakeholders that they're very keen to work alongside council as this affects particularly their 3 businesses. Recommendation 3 advises that public feedback will be sought and obviously brought back to the council chamber. Do any of the stakeholders have an opportunity to participate in the trials rather than just have their feedback sought?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Absolutely, I think the trials wouldn't work without working with them. So I believe for us to succeed in this project, we need to work alongside those people and make sure that the options that we're trying out are things that we're going to align with their interests as well. So.
Thank you.
Councillor Meehan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question's pretty well been covered, but I just need some clarification. So we're looking at McDonald's side of Featherston Street and Mitre 10's side of Featherston Street, taking the left-hand turn out at McDonald's side and the right-hand turn out at Mitre 10 side?
Correct.
So we're going down to 2 lanes on both sides. So
the intersection.
I heard you say when Councillor Dennison asked that it would be minimum impact and it banks up to North Street. I use that intersection regularly, and I can tell you it banks up well past North Street currently. So you take the right turning lane out, I would see that a car parked up in that lane wanting to turn right, providing you had an arrow, they'd be able to go. If there was no arrow to go, the through traffic would never let them go. If you went the other way and took the arrow out and a straight ahead traffic was going, whichever way you go with it, I'm sort of probably confusing it, whichever way you go with it, isn't that going to bank the traffic up a whole lot more? So North Street would all of a sudden end up Ruahine Street, I would see, the bank up of traffic. Wouldn't that create traffic coming from the side streets a problem with banking up? Aren't we going to run the risk of more accidents, more people taking risks?
So through you, Mr. Chair, I think there's still some more investigation work to do in those trials, changing the way the traffic lights work at that intersection with Featherston Street, to see what the impact's going to be as an option to us to try that out, and to then have people staged up and down the street to see what the impacts are. So we may be able to try that out and see what the reality is going to be for us.
Thank you for that. So what you're saying is the process today, whatever's decided today, there'd be a number of trials working through how this actually works before a decision is made.
Absolutely, and certainly some of those conflict areas, like the number of car parks and where they're going to be and which side of the road, the way the intersection works. We're working with our colleagues at Waka Kotahi to make sure that that's going to be suitable. The intersection, the right-hand turn into the businesses, all those things are sort of details that we'll be working through as part of the next phase, and absolutely want to get the input from the stakeholders the whole way through.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I've really just got one question, which is really around a point of clarification. The designs that we've actually seen today, they are about 30% of the completed design for the project. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So all of the detailed consultation with the key stakeholders will take part going forward from this point. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One further question raised in my mind by some of the conversation around trials. The presentation, I think it was you, Liv, talked about it takes a while once a change comes in for things to kind of settle down. And I'm just kind of wondering, will these trials be run long enough that will kind of be to a settled state, or will we just kind of be observing a lot of disruption and reacting to kind of flux rather than actual change?
We've talked about that quite a lot because, you know, there's options where you could just put a bunch of road cones down, right, to test something, but then would people act like they were in a construction zone, and would that actually give us qualitative feedback? So I guess with each trial, we'll probably, I suspect, get to the point that they will be for different periods of time, depending on what it is, and again, trying to make sure that it covers sunny days or rainy days and busy times and not busy times, so we do have quite reflective data, but that's something we're going to flesh out once we, I guess, pinpoint what trials we're going to focus on.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Great, thank you. It's questions done. So thanks to those online and to the officers. So we have we have the three recommendations there. We'll get those up online. And the first one's around council endorsing a preferred cycleway option to be implemented on Featherston Street to be either option 1, a separated unidirectional cycleway on each side of the road, or option 2, a separated bi-directional cycleway on the northern side of the road only. I'm happy to move number 1, option 1, and look for a seconder, which is the Deputy Mayor. Also number 2. If we can get number 2, that the council note that either option, the design of the pedestrian crossings will be worked on alongside the cycleway development. Final locations for pedestrian crossings will be part of a detailed design that will be presented back to council for approval later this year. And that 3, that council note that several trials are proposed to be undertaken for various elements of the overall project. Public feedback for these trials will be brought back to council for consideration alongside the final design and tender award. Again, I'm happy to move those, and seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Councillors, look, thank you for your questions this morning, and it is quite a big subject. And look, as I said, I'm happy to support the separated cycleway on each side of the road. I think there's a number of reasons why, but I think we do need to agree it is a dangerous carriageway. I don't think we can say it isn't. I would like some stats, though, on what is happening just in the last couple of years. I don't think it's a good idea presenting 10-year-old stats for a transport project. I think times have moved on from 10 years ago. But I think you were doing that to give context to the road. Look, it's really busy, and some of our public comments sort of explained how busy it was. You know, there's a state highway crossing there. There's 40 plus side streets. There's 300 plus driveways. So it's a really congested space. It consists of homes, small and large businesses, schools, churches. We even have the Hoffman Kiln there as well. So it's quite a diverse mix of who's on the carriageway. It's a main route for us around the city. It moves traffic and people around our city, but it should probably include our cycleway network as well, and that has been signalled in some of our plans. I just would emphasise that the GPS may change. We're basing a lot of it on the current thinking. Will that change? Possibly. Will it stay the same? Who knows? So we just have to keep that in mind as well. But it is here today, so we need to make a decision. And look, I think it all can be done, and we just need to keep safety at the heart of that. There's always going to be tension when we do make these big changes, and I think on the whole, the process has been pretty good. There's definitely some parts that can be improved, but I do want to acknowledge everyone that's participated. Anybody that was involved in College Street and had to wear the battle scars from that will know what I'm talking about. This has been a much better process and seems to have fed in more people. Although I would say, and I encourage the officers to do better, and the consultants in NZTA around the business network. They haven't been spoken to. We've got 4 of them saying that here today, in the manner that they think they deserve to be spoken to. There's livelihoods, and in one grouping of businesses there's 700 employees. So we've just got to be mindful of that. But I do encourage the officers to look at how they work with that. You know, pilots and trials to ensure that access is retained as much as possible, I think is a major key to that. I appreciate it's a narrow carriageway, and I think the slowness, if it's going to be slower, and I'm going to have to accept that it is, we might all need to accept that. Raised carriageways, crossings, we're all going to have to accept that's going to be the new norm. But I'd ask officers to look at retaining, where they can, right-hand turns. You know, a small amount of inset parking, which just allows some of what will, if they don't, will be landlocked businesses, which effectively values will fall through the roof, and I'm just not sure we want that. There's some balance. What I'm signalling here is there can be some balance. But the cycleway, I think everyone's agreed it needs to happen, and it needs to be separated, and it needs to be safe. So please support this, and we look forward to the officers bringing stuff back. I encourage you again to talk to everybody, especially the businesses, because I think you heard today that they haven't been heard. Deputy Mayor.
Tēnā koe, Mr Mayor. I think what we've heard and what we know is that the underlying issue is safety. The status quo is not safe for road users. We have funding and the opportunity to make changes and make improvements. Through the consultation process, we heard that pedestrians also stated that they feel unsafe. People need to move. Providing safer provision for movement within and around the city helps our immediate needs and looking forward to the future. I would like to acknowledge the staff for the sessions that they had, and I agree that there was a good cross-section of the community represented there. When the fuel tax subsidy ends at the end of this month, people will be impacted. They're already feeling the pinch, and they'll be under more pressure. More people will look to other modes of transport, cycling and walking, the vulnerable users. We need to build resilience and make it safe so people can cycle, which is more affordable. I recall many years ago the Green Bikes initiative, a wonderful initiative, and if I'm not mistaken, Massey University were heavily involved and partnered with us. Possibly that's something that we look at down the track to support. I spoke to a friend who is an experienced cyclist and cycles everywhere around Palmerston North. He went to Amsterdam not long ago and said that they've been going for about 80 years with their cycleways. He was shocked by the brevity of speed in the cycleways, he said, but he did note that the coloured lines on for both pedestrians and the cyclists was really helpful. The problem still exists. We need to find a safe outcome for all road users and suitable solutions to support businesses and services, e.g. those businesses that are here today and the doctors and so forth. In item 10, page 60, 7.4, it states that the options suggested will create a safer environment for cyclists, and ancillary work will happen under both options, will increase pedestrian and motorist safety as well. I was really pleased to hear from the officers that we can proceed with the pedestrian and cycleways and continue to work with the businesses. I think we definitely know we want to continue to work closely with the businesses. We do need to future-proof. Kia ora koutou.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and colleagues. A few comments, as you might imagine, given my interest in this kind of topic. Actually, a little known fact probably for most of you, when I first moved to New Zealand into Palmerston North, my first flat was in Featherston Street. And 23 years ago even, it was a bit uncomfortable on a bike, and I'd say that it's gotten a lot busier and a lot more challenging since then. Look, while a lot of the focus here is around safety, for me the overarching narrative here is really around making sure that as the city keeps growing, people can still keep moving through the transport network. And I think there's a particularly strong case around Featherston Street when we look at this. In the big picture, a lot more population coming to us, transport demand is growing even faster than the population, got medium density housing on the way, and it is a significant key connector route in the city. So when you add all that up, in the future we're actually going to be needing to move a lot more people on Featherston Street than we even are today. And the reality is that stacking in more cars, there simply isn't room. Building more lanes just leads you to needing to build more lanes. So what we need to do is get ways for people to find other ways to get through. Buses, bikes, walking, micromobility, etc. In addition to keeping the traffic flowing better for people that need to stay in cars, deliver vehicles, youths, get to retail, etc., it also gives us a significant health dividend by getting this right, and it gives us a significant sustainability dividend by getting this right. So very much in support of the direction here. One of the really nice things, we always call these, cycle lanes, it's all about cycle, cycle, cycle. You actually look at the safety dividend. The safety dividend comes across every single mode. So people in vehicles will be safer, pedestrians will be safer, and yes, people on bikes will be safer. So actually getting this project means it will be going from one of our most dangerous streets to a much less accident-prone street, which is a fantastic outcome for the community. I see this as a must-do project for everyone, for users of all ages, to have proper transport choices. Brief comment around how many cycleways. Definitely supportive of the direction that's been moved here in terms of having 2 one-way cycleways. It's a much more intuitive, safe, consistent, and therefore much more likely to see higher utilization approach and to actually deliver those safety benefits that we're after. To comment as well around parking, that this is, we should make no mistake about it, this is quite a significant change for parking in that street in terms of what's available for businesses and for residents as well, and would acknowledge that there's significant impacts there. Fundamentally, though, we have to ask, is on-street parking the best use of limited space on a key connector route when we have side streets, when we have off-street parking? The reality is that on-street parking, it doesn't actually move people. It actually does the exact opposite of moving people, and we need to be able to move people through this corridor. But we do need to get that right in terms of the timing and making sure that the side street parking and the activation of that is well supported, and I'd be very keen for officers to take an approach where that is delivered concurrently rather than waiting for a lot of issues to develop. So if we can have concurrent delivery of those side street improvements, will be a much better way forward in terms of resolving the challenges that will be faced around those needing to adapt their parking habits that have built up over a number of years. Briefly around process, yes, College Street, clearly some lessons were learned there, and it has been fantastic and a real tribute to our officers for the scale of work that they've undertaken, the quality of work that they've undertaken with the community here, and bringing the community with us, working with the community to resolve those issues rather than some of the approaches that have been taken in the past. Also really great to see Waka Kotahi supporting us here, obviously in terms of the investment, but also the improvements to the State Highway 3 intersection of Rangitikei Street and Featherston. We know how challenging it is for Waka Kotahi to commit to improvements in their network in an urban environment. So this
Councillor,
is really
can I ask you to wrap it up?
You may. That was really where I wanted to get to. I would ask you to support this so that we get a really strong signal in the next big step to the cycling network and our transport systems. Thank you.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Occasionally I do agree with Councillor Barrett. We do have a growing population in here in Palmerston North. We're heading towards 100,000 K. And here we have the Featherston Street, Ruahine Street intersection, probably the busiest intersection in the town. And like Councillor Mayor and I use it literally every day. And just when you see the build-up now, sometimes right back to Grey Street and right up to really badly, especially around peak hour traffic. And that's going to get worse too as more people come into town. And to take out the right turn lanes, to me, because of that problem, seems stupidity, to be perfectly honest. Why would you make more congestion and longer queues? We're not Auckland. Why try to be like Auckland? I can't agree to take out those right-hand lanes, because just go down there any time in peak hour traffic and see how many people are using those right-hand lanes. I can't understand why we're even thinking like that. Have a look at people that come into the city down that road, from Fielding, from Bulls, etc., to work, to shop, whatever. They're not going to start using cycles. Doesn't matter how much we might ask them to.
they're going to come in their cars, and most of the people are going to be using their cars. There will be some using bikes, but not as many as people think they are. What worries me is the trials. I want to see those trials held during peak hour traffic, not just say from 10 to 2 during the day to see how it goes. I want to see it over several days, and I want to see it there in peak hour traffic, so we can have a genuine look at what sort of problems we might be raising in ourselves. And small businesses, you take their parking away, you take their livelihood away. Some of those small businesses have been up Featherston Street for years, and they depend on their parking, and we're talking about taking their existence away. Seriously consider that. I'm not too keen on taking away too much parking unless we have to. Thank you.
Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise to add my voice to the debate, and I'm happy to support the recommendations before us. I was one of those councillors that had the opportunity to attend 2 out of the 3 sessions hosted by council staff, and it was a good sort of exercise to hear from the community, businesses, and also those affected by the changes to come. While I recognise that some of the that these changes will have negative impact on parking regardless of which option is chosen. Option 1, which we've chosen today, I think provides the greatest safety benefits for cyclists and pedestrians compared to option 2. Not only because it provides good cycle connectivity to existing and future routes identified in the urban cycle network master plan, including Botanical Road, Ruahine Street, and also Vogel Street, but also because staff have indicated that this option is best practice in New Zealand and internationally. Now, safety or pedestrian safety and cyclists, the safety of cyclists and motorists has been very much paramount and has been a key theme in this process, if I may say. I think one of the key issues that were raised in one of those sessions is that pedestrians or cyclists feel unsafe to ride on Palmerston roads. We have had a number of crashes on this road and 2 fatalities, and personally, as a city councillor, I do not want to see any more lives being claimed on that stretch of road. However, I'm concerned also with the loss of car parking for businesses, particularly those that have indicated that on-street parking is necessary for their survival. And these are businesses that rely on on-street parking for their customers. And these are people that rely on their businesses for their livelihoods. Just a father or mother who has a business on that piece of road or piece of street that's going to have the parking taken. And now we're going to require some of their customers to walk 200 meters away, 300 meters away, 500 meters away, park in an in-between street for a customer to come to their businesses. That puts off a lot of people. And we have to think about those businesses and also those residents that are going to lose some of those car parking, especially those on Ruahine Street and that section of Ruahine Street and Vogel Street, going from 150 on-street car parks to 0. I think it's a bit of a stretch for me personally. And I would encourage council staff to engage with all those residents as well as part of the detailed design. I'm happy to see also, as part of that detailed design, a possible mitigating measure being put in place, such as parking time restrictions to promote greater availability of on-street car parks in order to mitigate the shortfalls or the loss of car parks on that piece of road and along the street, along that piece of street as well. So I'm really happy to support this, and I would encourage council staff to engage with everybody, and particularly businesses, and also those on the section of Ruahine and Vogel Street. I think those are the ones that have come to me the most as well, including businesses, to sort of relay the frustration around this as well. So I'm happy to support this and I'll leave it today. Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Colleagues, before I speak, I urge you to be open-minded on what I'm about to say and to hear me out, because I know a number of you share my concerns, but we are treating this project as a fait accompli that has to happen. It does not have to happen. So please let me put forward the alternative case. I want to deconstruct the reasons for doing this dedicated cycle lane. Firstly, that it's safer for cyclists and particularly students. This represents, or cycle accidents represent 6.5% of all crashes on the road. 3 out of the 20 serious or fatal crashes. Now, to Councillor Zabelin's point, yes, there may be some minor instances going unreported, but I highly doubt there are serious or fatal crashes that are going unreported. So we've had 3 over a 10-year period. What the crash data shows is this is a very unsafe road to drive on in a vehicle, and we should be looking at how we can make it safer for people in a vehicle to reduce crashes. We don't do that by removing right-hand turn bays, and we don't do that by removing medians, which in many cases is the only safe way for people to get onto Featherston Street. This plan is going to make it less safe for vehicles, which is where we see the majority of the crash statistics. We are talking about 3 over a 10-year period of cycle-related incidents. So I'm not convinced in the argument that this is a serious problem. In terms of what we are dealing with. In terms of making it safer for pedestrians, the loss of medians, I feel, will open up Pandora's box. As someone who walks to work down Featherston Street every single day and uses the median to get across the road every single day, taking away a median that runs along the whole road, providing somewhat safe places to cross, and replacing that with 5 fixed pedestrian crossings is going to reduce the ability for pedestrians to cross our road safely if we remove that median at the same time. In saying that, I do believe that the case for making the street safe for pedestrians is valid and has quite a strong case behind it, and I would like us to look at not supporting the cycle lane aspect, but progressing work on making the street safe for pedestrians and installing those crossings while maintaining medians. The argument for it that it encourages cycling and long-term behaviour change, it hasn't elsewhere. Americans use the one more lane argument for roads. If we just build one more lane, then traffic will be fixed. Well, cyclists and cycle lanes are becoming exactly the same case. If we just build one more cycle lane, then suddenly the network will work and suddenly people will use it. Well, it isn't. It isn't working. People are not using it, and we do not just need one more cycle lane, then it'll all work. Or just one more. So that same exact argument goes for this plan here. It hasn't been proven to work in our city. We'll look back with our full network and say, where were the warning bells that it wasn't working? Well, we're seeing the warning bells in our city now. In terms of the consultation process, officers have admitted there was little opportunity for anybody who didn't want to see this plan enacted to contribute. There was little opportunity to express a favour toward the status quo. We have presented our community with a baked cake, not with genuine opportunity. And the amount of people who said to me, William, I'm not happy about it, and I said, well, go to the co-design sessions. They said, well, why? Why would I bother? The council's telling us they're going to do a cycle lane, so if I don't want it, well, they're not going to listen to me. So the case against this, a loss of up to 85% of parking, outlined on page 67 really very well by officers. We're going to have a lack of off-street parking for residential properties, albeit the residential properties on Featherston Street have already seen a significant amount of subdivision and have actually very few off-street car parks. So we're going to take away parking for residential zones. The hospital area already has 80 to 95% occupancy on statistics that I feel are very probably favourable towards this plan. Medical centres, disability and those with impaired walking are going to have to walk further. We're going to have sports clubs and fields. Papawaria Park, for example, will have limited parking for people to access it for sports. There's going to be limited parking at school pick-up and drop-off zones, and small businesses will lose their customers. This plan only provides for 37% of peak time requirement. And as I expressed in my questions, that was peak time requirement in the middle of summer where it wasn't raining and the weather was good. So I guarantee, without an extensive study being done, that there will be significantly higher, and that there is significantly higher peak time occupancy when the weather is less good. The loss of medians, I've expressed, I feel it's going to be incredibly dangerous for pedestrian movement and car movement. There's going to be harm to businesses, as we've heard today, loss of the right-hand turn lanes, as well as loss of parking. We're going to see medium and high-density homes lack the off-street parking required. And as a council, we are trying to encourage medium density in subdivision, so if we do go through with a plan like this, we're going to have strict requirements for how much off-street parking homes need to accommodate for this plan. We're unable to satisfy peak time demand. There's going to be excessive congestion as a result of this plan, and emergency service usage also needs to be taken into account. Page 70, oh no, I've spoken about that. We heard from Sports New Zealand that experienced cyclists may still not use it, and that inexperienced cyclists will quite possibly stay in their car if the cycleway isn't done to a level that works for those individuals.
Councillor, can you wrap it up, please?
Long story short, people do not... We've presented... This is 30% of the way through. Yes, the plan may change, but we're baking with salt, not with flour. This is a bad plan. I have a seconder to put forward an alternative motion if this fails, that we progress the pedestrian upgrades, but we do not progress the cycle upgrades. This does not need to happen. I was open to seeing this plan, and this plan has shown conclusively that there is no way we can do it without killing the road. So let's not do it, and let's work on the pedestrian upgrades.
Councillor Isabella.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just to kick off, I'd say that the road is an inanimate object and cannot have its life ended, especially through policy. So I have attended all 3 of the co-design sessions. Thought they were really well attended. I was surprised by how well attended they were given the length of time and that people kept coming back. It was wonderful. I really want to shout out to the staff. We had a lot of officers there who were working late nights and just doing awesome work connecting with the community. I sat at a different table with a different group each time, and through that I felt I got a very wide view of all sorts of different road users and residents and businesses in that area, and weighing that up was a really interesting and tricky exercise, which was commented by most of the tables as well, that what we're not doing a new road, we're not building a new road. If we had a new road, then we could make room for all of this stuff. What we're doing is retrofitting in a really tiny, complicated space. So there are trade-offs that have to happen. I'm really heartened to hear regarding McDonald's and Countdown Mitre 10. I've had quite a few discussions with those business owners that there is intention to closely work with access to their businesses, because that's not just a parking issue, that is access. The majority of those customers do come from a right-hand turn, which we've heard, but they have their freight, their deliveries come in through that right-hand turn. It's losing that kind of access is a major impediment to the operation of those businesses, not just for customers, but actually getting their goods and materials in store in the first place. So if we're trialling this, we think we need to be very, very deliberate that we are not impeding that kind of access. There seem to be some simple solutions. Can we move the median back a little bit? Can we put in clearways or cross-hatching that allow people to make that turn, keeping that space clear? I feel like there are some elegant solutions, and I have some assurance now that that is going to receive some attention. So I hope the businesses take that assurance on as well. But just moving on to safety, I think looking at crashes and seeing a low number of serious incidents and questioning whether that discounts all the other potential safety issues on that road, just because a cyclist or a pedestrian isn't killed on the regular at a particular intersection doesn't mean that it's safe. One person killed on our roads is too many. One person injured on our roads is too many. If you have a minor crash, that doesn't mean that you walk away from that unscathed. You can experience trauma, you can experience anxiety, you can experience actual fear of going into those kind of congested intersections. Again, I think it's a very narrow-minded view to go, hey, there's no collateral damage in here, so is it really safe? Do we really need to be making it safer? Yes, we do need to be making it safer. Just look at all the perceptions that we have in this report that shows why people don't bike. They don't cycle there because they don't feel safe to do so. There was an extraordinary video that was shown at the co-design session, I think the first one, which was one of our officers with a GoPro on his helmet, which cycled the length of Featherston Street, and we were tasked to point out as many hazards as we could find. It was frankly alarming how dangerous that trip was. That sort of impediments, obstructions, that's happening every single day to anyone who cycles down Featherston Street. That is not safe. What we're really looking at, I think, and it comes across pretty clearly in this report, if we look at the pros and cons of these options, it's a binary issue, safety versus parking. There is a trade-off there. But if we're looking at a grieving family and say we didn't do all we could do to make this road safer, but you can enjoy some on-street parking and you won't have as much of a walk, that's not an acceptable trade-off to me. I'm absolutely in favour of option one. It's unidirectional. It is safer. It is the safest option. It is the best practice nationally and internationally. It's familiar to our road users. It's consistent with
Councillor,
the rest
can
of the
we
network. And
leave
I'll
it
leave
time?
it there.
Good, thank you.
Mr.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm going to stand and support option 1 being explored further, and that comes with a proviso, because I am sympathetic to some of the argument that Councillor Wood has brought forward, because of these unanswered questions at this point. The trial, I would expect to give more information around the impact on the congestion on the road users, and the queuing impact of what that result could end up like being monitored more. The parking is an issue, and it's been an issue on every other street we've tried to adjust, so I can't see it being changed here. And in College Street, just of interest, there was about 70 odd curbside parks taken out of that plan, but almost as many being indented into the curb at some extra cost, like hundreds of thousands extra cost. And I'm not going into blindsided thinking that this project's only going to cost what Waka Kotahi's poured up in a portion of our own. I'm realistic that there's going to be some need for some indented parking and the like, and that's going to come at a considerable extra cost. I'd like to know that before we started putting in changes to the lifetime infrastructure. I was also disappointed that we haven't explored the green space outside Mitre 10 up to the Rangatiki roundabout, which council owns, evidently. And it's future-proofing the roading network to give wider capacity. And yet in this investigation, it hasn't even been explored how that could be utilised and actually part of this intersection design. So we're going to put lifetime infrastructure in here for the next 50 years, whatever, without even considering the need of picking up that land to utilise. It just seems very odd. And that's, I think, is because this is centering on a cycleway more than the wider roading network itself. So I think that's a fundamental shortfall. In the other projects that we've done with cycles counts, I think the baseline data has been very sketchy. I'd love to have that really solid and locked in. I'd love to have the needs of business taken in more consideration, and I think Councillor Zebba-Bellins outlined some of that cross-hatched, shortening up the solid medium, being some of the solution around that, and I don't see that being so complicated, but I do want to make sure that those businesses' considerations are being taken into account. So I'm supportive here, but I have some high expectations of what needs to come back after this trial. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll be quick, short and to the point. Disappointing to hear that there weren't any schools at the co-design. I acknowledge the Deputy Mayor was, but it gravely concerns me that Council was contemplating having 2 types of different cycle lanes, so I certainly support option 1. I certainly support everything that Councillor Woods just said, and I love your passion. Yes, safety is very important, but common sense decisions are too. What's the point of having a public sitting through 9 hours of workshops with the time and the massive cost of this council where nobody's listened to? As you've heard this morning from Bevan, the GM of Stewart's Mitre 10, Mitre 10, McDonald's and Countdown are all very worried about the negative effects to the roading we have on their business, especially losing right-hand turns into their car parks. All 3 attended the workshops and felt the good ideas they were voicing were falling on deaf ears. Everybody's on the same page, agreeing that cyclist safety is paramount here, but there must also be a positive way forward. Combined, these 3 large businesses employ around 700 people in Palmerston North, thus equating to thousands who rely on them weekly to survive. A reduction in business will most certainly see a reduction in staff numbers, and as you heard from Bevan, this is the reality we're facing here. These businesses are all fantastic corporate citizens in our city, and I was blown away learning how much they donate back to our community. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars annually back into our city and the wider community's groups. My real concern is, as well, if goalposts are necessarily shifted, the sponsorship could very well be slimmed down or stopped altogether to also compensate for the loss of business that will most certainly happen. As I said, I'll certainly be voting for option 1 and look forward to officers and planners listening and finding positive solutions for everybody. Also say that loss of car parks is always deeply concerning and not good. Thank you.
Councillor Meehan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a couple of points I want to make. It's been pretty well covered off. I too love the passion of Councillor Wood. Businesses are my main concern, how they will be affected. And it's not just the big businesses. I appreciate Mitre 10 and McDonald's, but it's the little businesses. It's the little flower shop, okay? And the likes of those businesses, they need those couple of parks that you take them away and that's their business gone, that's their livelihood gone, and the people that are employed by them. I've heard a lot mentioned about side streets. Have you had a look at the side streets off Featherston Street? They're already chock-a-block, okay? So I'm not sure where that's coming from. Okay? The crash statistics of 3 we've heard mentioned. I don't think it matters how many crashes there are. We want the road safe. We know that. We all agree with that, okay? And I don't care how many more cyclists get on bikes, or how many more people get on bikes and ride them, you're going to get more cars. The growth of cars on the road compared to bikes on the road is always going to outgrow it. It doesn't matter how we try and turn it around. It's been proven. I've checked the stats. It's there. So the bottom line for me is I think the design needs to go back to the drawing board. I really do, okay? I agree. It has to be a two-way cycle lane. It can't be just one side of the road, okay? That's been pointed out, the safety of that. But the real issue here is we've got a road that runs from one end of our city to the other, okay? Everybody uses it at some stage or another. And we need to do the right job on this. We need to do it right to make it right for all users, not just a particular group. Thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. First of all, I just really want to say congratulations to the staff that undertook the co-design workshops. They were well attended, and the workshops were well constructed, and I felt that everybody there made a good, solid contribution. I also just want to acknowledge those businesses that have come in today to make public comment. But I guess where I stand on this is that we are right at this point in time, only a 30% design completion. So there's a long way to travel. It is not a baked cake. Once we vote for, I guess, hopefully option 1 today, officers will then start some real engagement with those businesses that will be affected by the change. Make no mistake about it, Featherston Street is a dangerous road. It's dangerous for cars, cyclists and pedestrians. One death is one too many, and we've already had 2. Don't make light of people dying on the road. Don't do that for their family's sake. Retrofitting alternative modes of transport is difficult. It's not easy. It's a global issue. Everywhere around the world, councils, governments are trying to do this because we have to. And this road is actually part of our cycle master plan and has been in our planning for some time. So just throwing the baby out with the bathwater at this point in time is not an option. In fact, that would be very, very foolish. There is a need for a cycleway, and there is actually overwhelming support for it. Refer to page 66 of the report. As I said, this is part of our cycle master plan, and if we want people to actually use different modes of transport, we have to make sure that we actually cater for that. So option 1 is the most safest option. It's proven with the MCA, the multi-criteria analysis, so please support option 1 and please don't disregard the death of any person on the road. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. Just as a quick writer reply, because I think it's been really well covered and we're past the time that I was hoping we'd be in here. Look, this is a tough decision, and I appreciate that there's been a lot of speakers, but I don't think we should, and I think Councillor Hancock really summed it up well. We shouldn't paint this piece of road as a safe bit of road. It isn't, and as he stated, one accident or one death is one too many, so well put, Councillor. I think it's worth noting the residents and the businesses will already be giving up 200 plus car parks, so that is quite significant. But that's obviously to accommodate these cycleways, and I think we're all probably in agreement that that has to happen. But I also want to acknowledge some of the commentary a little bit earlier about the access to some of these organisations and businesses. And I would implore the officers to, explore and identify what has been teased out in questions about possible options. Speed will naturally become lower, and I think that's a good thing. And I think we've got to accept there's going to be some queuing and congestion. We can't go into this with the officers and the consultants are just going to magically make all the queuing and congestion go away. There will be some, but it is one of our main intersections, and we just have to accept that's part of the landscape. But I'm sure, again, there is a balance to make the street the best it possibly can be, safer and better for all. So we'll vote, please. And that has passed 13 votes for and 2 against. Thank you. So it's a good clap for morning tea, I think. So we'll be back in the chamber at 22:12, please. And councillors, there's a little surprise in the councillors' room for you. Tato, welcome back. Hope the councillors enjoyed the cookies. The CE reckoned they were pretty nice. Right, we'll move through to number 9, which is around the Summerhill Drive Cycleway update. And I think we've got Hamish back in the hot seat again. Thank you. Councillors, we're going to try and move, we are going to break just around 12, so we're going to try and move through at some pace. So just note that when you're commenting or questioning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So I'd like to present the paper on the Summerhill Drive Cycleway update, where we have options to go for a unidirectional cycleway. We're going to put in permanent separators there over the top of an already existing cycleway that's unidirectional. The issue we need a decision on is we have 3 options for the area around the shops there. There's an existing infrastructure that we're looking to modify to make it safer and to work more appropriately for what's going to be the separated cycleway. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Hamish. Look, just one question from myself. Obviously, I've actually spoken to a couple of the businesses, and you obviously have as well, and had quite a bit of contact with them.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Our comms team have been engaging with the...
And welcome, Liv.
Yes, lots of talking to businesses and other stakeholders up in Summerhill too.
Yeah, great. Okay, that's awesome. Thank you. Councillor Wood.
Just one question this time. Hamish, just a quick question of where the road safety stats are in this report. There don't seem to be any.
Through Mr Chair, sorry, I don't know whether we've included any safety stats in this. It was a cycleway change identified as part of the cycling network master plan, so we're just basically formalising what's there already. So yeah, we haven't included the stats, so apologies for that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor McLeod.
Thanks, Hamish. Just one question on page 23. Just want to understand the point here on 2.6 of the report, last point, which states that currently about 4.4% of people walk to work and 3.7% cycle to work from the Summerhill area. What metrics were you using to determine that? Was it through the consultation? Sorry if I missed it.
No, it was through surveys done of the counts done out on site, I believe.
Oh, okay, cool. No, thanks for that. Just want to understand that. Thank you.
Councillor Bellin.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a couple of quick questions. One was I noted that speed, or the speed limit on State Highway 57 was out of scope for this, but it is coming through really strongly as what the locals think would be one of the things you could do to make the road safest. Do you think there's any receptivity to that coming through on Waka Kotahi's end as something that could potentially be brought into scope?
I can answer that one because I had some conversations with the Waka Kotahi team about speed because it was a big concern, but also probably the most overwhelming bit of feedback we had was improved pedestrian safety outside where the New World shopping centre area is. And so we asked them that if they're not planning on doing something in the interim, at least when we're next moving into this engagement period, can we have some information about what they're looking at, timeframes, that kind of thing, so that we can provide some updates to the community too.
Thank you. And just one further one, if I may, on at 4.2, which is on page 25, just noticed in the key for the figure, section 1, Pacific Drive to Turitea Road is, as commented there, is largely commercial. I had understood that the majority of people on the other side of the state highway are accessing the road through Pacific Drive, so the residential area, that's their point of access onto the state highway. So I wondered how you'd reached that conclusion. I would have thought there would have been a great amount of residential use on that road.
Through you, Mr Mayor. I believe that was just sort of the majority of the existing land use, so it's the shopping centre and the ICT over the road.
Right,
the way
not
that
so, not so much the characteristics of the usership.
Correct, yeah.
Okay, great, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you. A couple of years ago, there was some treatments done on Summerhill Drive. Why wasn't the scope then covering as wide as it was now to have to redo some of the stretch of road?
Unfortunately, I wasn't around as part of that decision-making at that time. I think it was to address a perceived issue at the time, just around that area. But it's part of the cycle network master plan, so the intention is to do that whole stretch, and certainly to have the whole thing connected and completed will make a big difference to that sort of network-wide approach.
So the work that was done 2 years ago, what's been the resulting benefit? Have we had increased numbers of cyclists? Have we got some measuring from what it was prior to that installation of treatment to now?
I believe we've only just got recent data that we've been using for this current project.
Sorry, I missed that first bit you said?
We've only got current data to be able to share.
Can we share that against what was the reported data in the report 2 years ago before that work was done?
We could go back and have a look at that, certainly.
I'd be most interested, because that was partly the reason we spent whatever sort of money we spent on that work back only 2 years ago. Just with the separation, there's some separation, and can I understand the treatments that are being looked at as far as options for the barrier? Has that been decided, or has that been explored?
So it's still being explored, and we'd like to keep it consistent with the Featherston Street project as well, so that they look consistent across the board. We do remember the slide Liv popped up in the first presentation that had some different options, so that we could still have rubbish trucks and that sort of thing straddle them, and yeah, so it'll either be the in situ or the concrete ones, or the rubber sort of the modular ones similar to outside the Ferguson Street depot.
Just as feedback, one of the options that was floated 2 years ago was having the railway sleepers, and yet there was a real opposition against concern that that would be unsafe because they're so low. Is that, I just want to explore, has that been considered as one of the options, or has that been ruled out?
No, it's not considered one of the standard treatment types.
Great. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Interested around the Pacific Drive, Taparuapehu Drive, Summerhill shops. Anything by way of pedestrian crossing kind of safety improvements that we can expect out of this project for that area?
Again, we've asked Waka Kotahi if they can provide an update about what they would consider doing in that space and whether it could happen in the same timeframes.
And just, I guess, to explore that a bit further, because it seems like in the Featherston Street example, we're kind of step by step with them. They're, you know, right beside us. Like, is it a different situation here?
I think the difference here is that that section is all state highway, whereas it's primarily the intersection on Featherston Street, and we're looking after both sides. Yeah, I think we are looking at some pedestrian improvements on the Summerhill Drive element. Obviously, that's one of our controlling roads. But yeah, I guess it's keep continuous conversations with Waka Kotahi.
So, okay, I'll leave that piece there. Section 2 here, which is nicely illustrated on the screen, is kind of, you know, an accommodation around the existing business use there. In future, if that were to, let's say, be redeveloped as housing or something, would that still be seen as a good practice treatment, or are we kind of locking in a land use there by taking this approach?
Through Mr Mayor, I don't believe we're locking out any future opportunities. I think sort of we're utilising the space that we've got and dealing with a specific safety issue at that location in a way that still allows for the businesses to function. So
and in future, if it was housing instead of businesses, would it still be a fit for purpose treatment, or would we be looking at needing to rework it again?
I believe it would still be a fit for purpose. We may not put that in other areas of residential spaces. It's just the way we're dealing with this specific problem for now. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Mr Mayor.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Liv. Thank you, Hamish. So we've got the recommendation that Council endorse option 1A for Summerhill Drive, and that is a unidirectional separated cycle on each side of the road for sections 1 and 3, and for section 2, the cycleway moved to the berm behind the parked cars. I'm happy to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Look, councillors, I live up this way. I travel and occasionally do use the cycleway, and I can tell you that this part is needed. This was always coming back to us, so I'm glad that the officers have taken a two-step approach to this. We were a little bit unsure how we were going to accommodate the three businesses, and there was all sorts of debate in the chamber the first time, and there's been some commentary from myself and even other councillors around the businesses. Two of them are quite large, and one of them is a manufacturing place, so you know there is quite a lot of movement there. So this section 2, moving it to the berm, is the safest way of protecting the cyclists. I think the cycleway is working. I'm just saying that from a gut feeling. There seems to be more people using the cycleway. We have, I think, nearly 12,000 residents up and around that part of town now, and a lot of them have had families. A lot of them are people that choose to cycle to work, and I have seen, and even some of our staff, who I occasionally wave to, coming into work. The speed has been slowed too. Since I've lived there, I think the speed was 80 k's at one stage, but as it's become more urbanised, the speed's dropped to 60, and I'd have to say that's been a great thing. It's made the whole road just feel safer. There's been parking taken off the streets. Initially, we had a lot of fear about that, and well, I'm not going to play that down, but it doesn't seem to be the heightened issue that it was previously. There is improved pedestrian, because it is a main thoroughfare into the city, and of course it's used a lot more with the Gorge Road being developed, and we have a lot more heavy traffic on it. I know when I was campaigning, I crossed that road many times, and I did use the median pedestrian barriers there, and they were very good. Just to some of the questions around the state highway part, which is near the Summerhill shops, that absolutely needs an overbridge. There's no way you can expect a state highway to be carrying with a tertiary institution, a new school going in, and lots of young families crossing a state highway. If this was Wellington, we'd have an overbridge like that. But unfortunately, Palmerston North does miss the investment occasionally with NZTA, so I implore to my NZTA colleagues, please, we've got to get onto this. As we progress the ring road, and I'm not waiting 50 years for that, we will need to start to move on this. So the overbridge is the clear option and has been identified for some time. It's just, it unfortunately is a costly option. So please, councillors, I hope you can support this. The residents, I think, are in a lot happier space. The businesses are in a lot happier space, and I think it's an example of just working things through well and in balance. Councillor Barn.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Very much in support of this, and would hope that we can all see a way forward with this one. I did just want to comment that I continue to be frustrated. I share your frustration with the overbridge situation about how we future-proof this developing part of the city. The report talks clearly about the amount of development we're expecting to see go in there. On the other side from where all of the facilities are, there's going to be more pressure on that as a suburban centre. And particularly, I'll continue to advocate for the poor people of Johnston Drive who find themselves marooned off the end of the city without even a public footpath to their name to connect them to Pacific Drive. And I raised this in the initial work here, continue to raise it with officers in their conversations with Waka Kotahi, and continue to be very dissatisfied on behalf of those residents that they don't even have a safe walking route down to Pacific Drive and then into the shops from there. Thank you.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly frustrating. I've just looking back on the Infrastructure Committee meeting on 2020, that we approved the 540 metres of strip, which is the section 2 essentially of this plan, and spent 426,000 doing vehicle treatments, bus indents, and repainting cycle lanes on the new alignment. And now part of this proposal includes moving the berm behind the beam behind the parked cars and redoing it, just without any monitoring on any improvements from the baseline data to now on how that's working or what the outcome of that investment is, and then redoing a middle strip of this carriageway. One resident said to me, why are we redoing that strip when there's another strip beyond the shopping centre that gets certainly narrow if you want to go further into Okotiri, where there was a death. You're talking about saving deaths and all the family impact. There was a death outside the road that come through just in recent months, where it's so narrow beyond the shopping centre, you can't hardly cross the bridge. And yet we're spending more money realigning, doing work we did back in 21. It seems absurd to me that we're redoing a stretch of road without any further monitoring, and yet we've got stretches of road beyond that that's in great need. And so my vote here today is a protest vote against this, just because the rationale seems so loose when we did this project, and yet we got that over the line, and now to redo it, I'm not into spending good money twice. And there's other needs clearly up beyond the shopping centre. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm very much happy to support the recommendation before us. I think the guiding principle, when considering this recommendation, has been for me has been around improving the safety of cyclists and pedestrians using that stretch of road. And I've used that road on a number of occasions. My sister lives on Johnstone Drive, so I'm very much familiar with the condition of that road. One thing that I also want to highlight, I think has been raised in the engagement process throughout the report, was cyclists feeling unsafe on this road, particularly for reasons including vehicles cutting into cycleways, and also the size of trucks and the speed also. And I understand that the mayor has also highlighted that speed was a big issue back then when it was at 80 k per hour, and now it's dropped to 60 per hour. And I'll be very keen to see what Waka Kotahi proposes, whether it goes back to 50 to make it a lot safer for cyclists and pedestrians in that area. And also, I think one of the issues, one of the opportunities raised in the report was also the expected growth in the area as well, which will put more pressure on traffic in that area. So it's paramount, it's significant and important for us as a council to make sure that we protect people that will be cycling or walking across that line, bearing in mind that there's only one sort of walkway going up that road. And also making sure that we make it safer for pedestrians and cyclists, particularly those that have expressed that who are feeling vulnerable cycling along that line, and also probably putting a bit of pressure on our council staff to keep engaging Waka Kotahi to see what can be done in terms of speed, because definitely once that area grows, we're going to see more trucks or more traffic in that area, and I think the speed factor will also go a long way in making sure that that road is safe for residents to cycle and walk on that stretch of road. Thank you.
Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to acknowledge the death years ago on Summerhill Hill, and a lovely lady lost her life, so I want to acknowledge her and her family, and also Hokowhiti School that lost a very special member of staff. Thank you.
All right, councillors, look, just as a quick right of reply, because there's been, and I just want to remind and repeat to councillors, and some may have forgotten, we're not redoing this. It was just delayed. That section was delayed. It was always to be staged. And it was on the back of some concerns of the businesses there and officers of the day, just with, and NZTA, but mainly our officers, were just a little bit unsure of how to deal with that. And they wanted to see how things were going to play out. We've now got to that part, and we're now completing that. As far as other bits of the road, it comes into a state highway. There's other partners with that. Again, any deaths bad, as we repeated just in our previous debate, and we've got to work with our partners improving that part as well. So look, we're just talking about the stretch of road that we know about as Summerhill Drive, which goes to the shops there. Ask you to support this. It will complete that bit of work and allows officers to connect up back into the city. And as some of our public comment was talking about, we build some cycleways, but we haven't necessarily to date connected them all up. This will start to connect some of it up. So ask for your vote, please. And it's passed 14 votes for with 1 against. Look, we're going to have to now adjourn this meeting. We have to break for a lunch break, and it will come back into the chamber, and I'll pass over to Councillor Bowen around the Culture and Sport meeting. If we have time, depending how quickly Councillor Bowen can get through her chairing of the meeting, we may come back to this meeting at the end of the day. If not, we are back in the chamber here at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning to complete our council agenda. Kia ora tātou, thank you everybody.